The bell over the door of Sharp and Reeve did not ring, and that was how Eleanor knew. It had rung for 90 years. It rang when the wind came up Bellamy Passage. It rang when the coal lorry went by on Cursiter Street. It rang once a week when Hilda Wren came up from her basement with glue on her fingers and an opinion about somebody's spine. It rang when you leaned on the door. It rang when you looked at it. Tonight Eleanor pushed the door open with her shoulder out of the rain, with a wet paper bag of shopping in one arm and the keys still in her teeth, and there was no sound at all. She stood there in the dark, with the rain running off her coat onto the boards, and understood in the ordinary silence of her own shop that somebody had taken the clapper out of the bell. There was a torch beam moving at the back, low down along the bottom shelf of the theology. Any sensible woman would have gone backward into the passage and run for the lights of Chancery Lane. Eleanor set the shopping down on the map chest and walked toward the light. He was a big man, and he was on one knee among her books, and he was ruining them. He had a torch clamped in his armpit, and he was pulling volumes off the shelf 3 at a time, holding each one by the boards and shaking it hard by the spine, the way you shake a coat to find a coin, and then dropping it on the floor. 400 years of paper on the floor of her shop. Somebody's Latin Bible face down in a puddle of her own rainwater. "Get out of my shop," Eleanor said. He did not startle. That was the part she would remember later, when she had learned enough to be properly frightened. He did not jump, he did not swear. He simply turned his head and looked at her, and went on shaking the next book. And she understood that he had known she was coming, and had decided she did not matter. "Which one did he keep?" the man said. "I am going to call the police. Your husband." He stood up. He was very wide, and the shop was very narrow, and he filled the aisle from the poetry to the maps. Daniel Reeve, valuer. Went into Bow Creek in his car 3 years ago in November. Which one did he keep? Eleanor's hand had already found the telephone on the counter, and had already found it dead. "A family tree," the man said, and came down the aisle. "Leather, gilt on the boards, a pedigree private printing about 150 years old. There is writing in the margins, and the writing is not English. You will have seen it. You will have handled it. Where is it?" "There are 11,000 books in this shop," Eleanor said, and her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. "If you want a catalog, come back on Tuesday and pay for one like everybody else." He hit her once, open-handed, across the ear, and the shop went white and loud. And then she was against the map chest, with the drawer handles in her back and his glove across her mouth, and a knife point resting on the soft place under her jaw, with no pressure on it at all, which was somehow worse. "Listen to me," he said pleasantly. "You are going to be very sensible now, because I am not the last man who is coming to look for it. I am only the first." And then he stopped talking, because the front door of the shop had opened and shut behind him without ringing, and someone else was standing in the dark by the poetry. Eleanor could not see him properly. She saw a long black overcoat, gone glossy with rain, and she saw that he was not hurrying, and she saw that he had his hands in his pockets. "That belongs to me," the man in the coat said. His voice was low and unbothered and slightly bored, the voice of a man telling a waiter the wine was corked, and the effect it had on the enormous man with the knife was extraordinary. Eleanor felt the glove come off her mouth. She felt the blade go away from her throat. She felt the whole shape of the man change, the way a dog changes when a bigger dog walks into the yard. "Mr. Vane," he said, "nobody told me." "No," the man in the coat agreed. "Nobody told you." Then he crossed the aisle in 3 unhurried steps, and he did something with his hands that Eleanor did not see, and never afterward wanted to, and there was a wet crack like a chair leg going, and the big man was on his knees among the fallen theology, making a thin whistling noise into the floorboards, and the knife was gone. A second man came through the door then, a shaved head and a close black beard and a flat gray suit already soaked through, and he took the big man by the collar and dragged him out into the rain of Bellamy Passage as easily as a bin bag, and the door closed, and the shop was quiet again, except for the rain and Eleanor's own breathing. She had been rescued. She knew distantly that she ought to feel rescued. The man in the black coat turned on the light. He was somewhere past 40, black hair cut short and combed straight back off a high forehead going iron gray in 2 clean streaks at the temples. A long face, deep vertical lines, from the nose down a mouth that did nothing. Pale gray eyes with almost no warmth in them, the color of the water in a photographer's tray. No expression whatsoever. He looked at the books on the floor, and he looked at the map chest, and last of all he looked at her, and the look was not kind, and it was not curious. It was the look of a man checking a lock. "Sit down," he said. "This is my shop. I know exactly whose shop it is." He picked up the Latin Bible from the puddle, closed it, and set it on the counter with a care that did not match anything else about him. "Sit down, Mrs. Reeve. My hands are going to shake in about 90 seconds, and I would rather you were sitting when they do." She sat down on the stool behind the counter because her legs had stopped consulting her. He did not come near her. He stood at the far end of the counter, with the rain running out of his hair, and he asked her questions for 19 minutes, and not one of them was, "Are you hurt?" Where had she bought her stock in the last 3 years? Who had sold to her? Who had bought from her? Who had a key? Who had ever had a key? Which of her regular customers asked for genealogy? Which asked for ciphers? Which of them paid cash? Had any of her husband's clients come back after he died? Had any of them come back more than once? Halfway through, he reached across the counter and took her right hand and turned it over and looked at her palm and the pads of her fingers, at the leather die under 2 of the nails, and the old scars from a bookbinder's knife, and he held it a moment too long, and then he put it down on the counter, as if he were returning something to a shelf. "You do your own repairs," he said. "Since I could not afford to pay Hilda any more, yes." "Where is the pedigree?" "I do not know what pedigree you are talking about," Eleanor said. "I have 4 shelves of family histories. Nobody wants them. Nobody has wanted them since about the time my grandfather died. If a book like the one that animal described came through my door, I would have priced it at £40, and it would still be here. And if it is still here, you may look at it, because it seems to me that you are going to look at it whether I say yes or not." Something happened in his face then. Not warmth, a flicker of something else, of attention, arriving the way a light comes on 2 floors up in a dark house. "You are either the most careless woman in London," Sebastian Vane said, "or the best liar in it. I have not decided which." "You could try being grateful," she said. "You could try being grateful that I did not have a stroke on my own floor." "I do not need you grateful. I need you honest." "Then you can start," said Eleanor, "by telling your man to put that clapper back in my bell." He looked at her for a long, unpleasant moment, and then he said, "Rook." The bearded man came back in glistening, and Sebastian said, "The bell," and went out into the passage without another word, and the black car at the mouth of Bellamy Passage swallowed him and pulled away, and Callum Rook, who had just dragged a man with a shattered elbow off her doorstep, spent 4 minutes on a kitchen chair with a pair of pliers, putting the clapper back into a 90-year-old brass bell. And then he touched 2 fingers to his brow at her and left. Eleanor locked the door. She swept up the broken glass from the poetry case. She picked her books up off the floor one at a time, 41 of them, and she interleaved the wet ones with newsprint and stood them on their foredges under the radiator like patience. She did not cry until the last one. Then she sat down on the floor of her own shop, among the theology, and put her hands over her face. And one thought went through her head over and over with a terrible clarity, which was that she had been in danger for 3 years and had simply not been told. Here is what Eleanor Reeve had told herself for those 3 years on the good days. That she was 36 and a widow, and that was not a tragedy, it was a fact, and facts do not need to be discussed. That she had loved her husband, a soft-spoken, clever, absent-minded man who could date a binding to within 5 years by the smell of it, and that he had loved her, and that his car had gone off the wet approach road at Bow Creek in November because the road was wet and because he had been working too late, and that the coroner had said accidental death in a flat voice at 11:30 in the morning, and that was the end of it. That the shop that her grandfather had opened in 1947, with its crooked floor and its stove and its 11,000 books and its damp back wall, was hers, and that she could hold on to it. That last one had stopped being true in about March. The shop was dying. It had been dying quietly for years, and then in the spring, it had begun dying loudly, in red letters, in envelopes she stopped opening and stacked instead on the map chest in a neat brick. Rent to the freeholder, rates, insurance she was legally required to carry and could not pay, £68,000 of her husband's debts, which had arrived after his death from 3 separate directions, because Daniel had handled all of it, and Daniel had never once looked worried in his life. And then, in the second week of May, on a Thursday, a man in a plain overcoat came into Sharp, and Reeve did not look at a single book, and bought the entire top shelf of the travel section. He did not haggle. He did not ask her to itemize. He asked her what she wanted for the shelf, and Eleanor, who had never sold a shelf in her life, said the first insane number that came into her head, which was £2,000, and the man wrote her a check for $20,000 and told her a van would come on Friday. She thought it was a mistake. She rang the bank. It cleared. The next Thursday, a different man in a plain overcoat bought the whole of the natural history 4 shelves and paid her 10 times what it was worth. The Thursday after that, the Maritime and the Atlases. 14 Thursdays. 14 checks. She paid the rates and the insurance and £31,000 of Daniel's debts and understood perfectly well that something was wrong, and went on taking the money because that is what people do. She had asked, of course. Every week she asked. Every week the man in the overcoat said the same 11 words in the same order as if reciting a line he had been given. My client prefers not to be known and asks after your health. That was the sentence Eleanor thought about sitting on the floor of her shop at midnight, among the wet theology, with her ears still ringing from a stranger's hand. Asks after your health. She got up. She washed her face at the little sink in the back. And then, because she had been a bookseller for 18 years, and a bookseller's granddaughter before that, she took down her stock ledger and started at the beginning of May, and worked forward shelf by shelf, sale by sale in her own handwriting. And by 2 in the morning she had it. Somebody was not buying books from her. Somebody was emptying her. 14 weeks, and the pattern was not a collector's and not a dealer's. A collector buys the good ones. A dealer buys the ones that move. This was somebody working along the walls of her shop, the way you work along a hedge looking for a lost ring. And they had started at the front door, and they were coming toward the back, and the thing they were coming toward was the family histories. Eleanor sat with her hand over her mouth. Then she got up and went to the 4 shelves at the very back of the shop, in the dark, past the theology, under the damp patch where nobody ever went, and she looked at the spines of the Victorian genealogies for a long time. She did not find anything that night. There were 206 of them, and 11 were bound in leather with gilt on the boards, and she opened all 11, and their margins were as clean and as boring as the day they were printed. But she did not find the shelf beside them either. She had forgotten it entirely, because at the very back, in the corner behind the stove, there was one narrow bookcase, with a strip of masking tape across the top, on which her own hand had written 3 years ago, in a state of mind she could no longer really remember the words, "Not for sale." Daniel's shelf, his own books. The ones from his study, which she had carried down here in a bread crate the week after the funeral, because she could not sleep in a flat that had his handwriting in it, and had shoved behind the stove and had never once looked at since. Eleanor stood in front of it with the lamp in her hand and did not touch it. Not that night. She was not brave that night. She turned off the lamp and went upstairs to the flat over the shop and lay awake until the milk float came. And in the morning she did what any reasonable woman does when a man she has never met puts a knife under her jaw, and a second man she has never met breaks his arm for it. She went out to find the one who paid. It took her 9 days. And it was not difficult, which frightened her more than if it had been. She did what she was good at. She followed paper. The vans had a name on their side, and the name led to a haulage yard in Deptford, and the yard's invoices were countersigned by a company with an address in St. James, a brass plate, a shop front of blue glass, and a name in gold above the door. Vane and Kroll. Fine Art and Manuscript Auctioneers, established 1892. Eleanor stood on the pavement opposite in the rain in her good coat, with her hair coming out of its pins, 36 years old, £6,000 from bankrupt, holding a paper bag with a rebound Rossetti in it, and looked at the gold letters, and thought about the word Vane in the mouth of a man with a knife. Then she crossed the road and went in. Blue carpet, glass cases with 2 objects in each, a girl at a desk who took her name and did not write it down, and within 90 seconds coming down a curved staircase, with both hands already out, a small, immaculate, silver-haired man in gold-rimmed glasses, who said warmly, before she had said one word. "Mrs. Reeve, at last. You know who I am. Everybody in the trade knew your husband, my dear." Lionel Vane took her hand in both of his, and his hands were very soft. He was the finest pair of eyes in London, and the worst businessman I have ever met, and I say that with love. "Sit down. You look wet through. You look thin." She had rehearsed it for 9 days, and it came out badly. Somebody was buying her out. Somebody was paying 10 times. The Vans were signed for by this house. She wanted to thank him, or she wanted to know who to thank, and last night a man had come into her shop with a knife. Lionel Vane's face did the most interesting thing Eleanor had ever seen a face do. The warmth stayed exactly where it was, like a picture left hanging on a wall, after the house has been sold, and behind it everything went cold and quick. "How fascinating," he said. "Which shelves?" "I beg your pardon?" "Not which sections, my dear. Which books? Which precise books have left your shop?" He leaned forward. "And do think carefully, did Daniel ever bring anything home from us? Anything of the family's, a ledger, a daybook, a genealogy? He had the run of our library for 11 years. "Mrs. Reeve." Callum Rook was standing in the doorway of the blue room, with reins still on his shoulders and his eyes on Lionel Vane, and not on her. Car outside. Nobody moved for 3 seconds. Then Lionel sat back and folded his soft hands, and smiled at her with enormous kindness. "Give my nephew my regards," he said. "Tell him the family misses him terribly." The car went east, and then south, and then under, and stopped in a brick tunnel beneath the arches at Shad Thames, where the air was 10 degrees colder and smelled of river and old wine. And Eleanor was walked past 4 men she did not look at, under a string of bare bulbs into a vault the size of a church nave, where 2 dehumidifiers ran like a heartbeat, and a long refectory table stood covered in paper. Sebastian Vane did not stand up. "Do you know what you did today?" he said. "I said thank you. You put your face in front of the one man in London who needed to see it." He set down his pen. "You walked into a building where your name has a price, and you said it out loud, twice, to the man who set the price. Then tell me what is happening in my shop." "No. 14 weeks. Eleanor came to the end of the table. She was shaking, and she let him see it because hiding it had stopped seeming useful. 14 weeks of money from nowhere, and a man with a knife, and a boy of 16 who helps me on Wednesdays, and Hilda Wren who is 78 and sleeps under my floor. I have a right to know what is in my own building. You have a right to be alive on Friday. That is the only right I am able to sell you." She took the last check out of her coat pocket, unfolded it, and laid it flat on the table in front of him. "Then I do not want it," she said. "I want a name or I want nothing." Sebastian Vane looked at the check for a long moment. Then he took a fountain pen out of his inside pocket, drew a line through the figure, wrote a larger one above it, initialed it, and slid it back across the wood toward her without any change in his face at all. "You will take it," he said. And Eleanor, who had spent 3 years being extremely polite to men in banks, felt something in her chest go quiet and hard. "Very well," she said. "Then I want a receipt." He stopped. "A receipt," he repeated, "for every book you have removed from Sharp and Reeve. 14 weeks. Titles, dates, edition, condition, and where they are being kept, because half of what your men have carried out of that shop is on rag paper. And if you have it in a lockup in Hackney, it is rotting while we speak." She put both hands on the back of a chair. "If you are going to empty my grandfather's shop, Mr. Vane, you will do me the courtesy of emptying it properly." The silence went on so long that one of the men at the far end of the vault coughed. "Most people ask me for a name," Sebastian said at last. "You asked me for a receipt." "Yes." "Rook will take you home." He picked his pen back up. "There will be a man in the passage from tonight. Do not speak to him, do not feed him, and do not go out after dark to look for him. He is not there to be your friend." The man in the passage came that night, and after him the second one, and after them the whole strange architecture of being protected by Sebastian Vane, which Eleanor came to understand was nothing like being cared for. 8 days later, at 4:20 in the afternoon, 2 men came into the shop, while Tobias Wren was up the ladder shelving the county histories, and one of them put the front window into the street with a wheel brace, and the other one put Tobias off the ladder into the map chest, and Eleanor got between them with a binder's paring knife in her fist, and screamed the shop down, and it was Hilda, 78 years old and deaf in one ear, coming up out of her basement with a hammer, who made them run. Eleanor sat on the floor in the glass with Tobias's head in her lap, and her hand clamped over the top of his ear, where it was open. And she was still there when the black car came up the passage. Sebastian crouched. He looked at the boy's ear for 4 seconds. He said, "Hospital, not the Royal London, the other one." And 2 men lifted Tobias out like a stretcher case. And then Sebastian stood in the middle of the wreck of her shop and did not say a single word to her about it. He walked out. By 6 the next morning, there was new glass in the window, laminated in a steel frame that had not been there before. There was a new lock on the passage door and a second one at the top of the stairs. Tobias Wren had 11 stitches and a private room and a television, and Hilda Wren had an envelope pushed under her basement door, with more money in it than she had earned in the last 4 years. And there were now 3 men in Bellamy Passage, one of whom sat all night in a parked van, reading a newspaper he never turned a page of. And when Eleanor rang the number Rook had given her and said, "Thank you for the boy," Sebastian said, "Do not thank me for the boy. The boy was hurt on my account," and hung up. 4 days after that, a woman was waiting for her in the newspaper room of the library, sitting at her table going through her notes. White blonde hair scraped back so tightly it lifted her eyebrows. No jewelry, a voice like a nurse. "Mrs. Reeve, my employer has a standing offer of £200,000 for a leather-bound pedigree of the Vane family private printing, 1871, with pencil annotation in the margins. There is no requirement that you understand the annotation, and no requirement that you tell Sebastian." She laid a card on the table, face down. "If it goes to him instead, I want you to think very clearly about what happens next. He does not need a bookseller after he has the book. He needs a bookseller who cannot talk." Eleanor did not touch the card. "What is your name?" "Desikel," said the woman pleasantly, and then she stopped talking, because Sebastian Vane had appeared at the end of the long table with his hands in his coat pockets, and the whole room did not know why it had gone cold. He walked Eleanor out past 900 years of newspapers without one word, and put her in the car and shut the door, and then stood on the pavement with his back to her for a full minute in the rain before he got in. That was the first time she saw his hands shake. "She said you would not need me afterward," Eleanor said. "She is not wrong about very much." "Is she wrong about that?" "Do not ask me questions you have already decided the answer to." "I have not decided anything." She turned in the seat to look at him. "That is the entire problem, Mr. Vane. I do not know what I am to you. I do not know if I am a woman you are keeping alive, or a cupboard you are waiting to finish emptying." "You are inventory," Sebastian said. The car went over Blackfriars in the rain. "You are a line on a list," he said quietly to the window. "You are a building with a damp back wall and 11,000 items in it and a risk attached. Do not mistake a hand on your door for a hand on your face, Mrs. Reeve. I have never in my life protected anything I was not protecting for a reason, and when the reason is finished, so is the protection. You should hope very much that I go on finding you useful." He did not come back for 9 days. The men stayed in the passage. The Thursday came and no check came with it, and no van. And Eleanor stood behind her counter at 5:30, with the red envelopes on the map chest, and understood that whatever she had said in the back of that car, she had said it to the only thing standing between her and the street, and she was so angry with herself that she could not eat. On the 10th night closing up, she saw him at the mouth of the passage. He was standing in the rain in a black overcoat with no umbrella, 40 feet away, looking at the lit window of her shop. And when she opened the door and the bell rang, he did not move, and he did not come in. He stood there for another minute in the wet. Then the car took him away. The check came the next morning. It was for double. And 2 days after that he began, without asking, to come inside. It happened the way weather happens. He arrived at 8 in the evening with a folder under his arm, sat down in the wing chair beside the stove in the back room, where her grandfather used to smoke and worked. Rook came and went. Men she never saw twice came to the back door and stood in the passage and spoke to him in low voices, and left. He ran the underside of a city out of a broken armchair, beside a coal stove in a shop that smelled of dust and hide glue, 4 feet from a woman sewing signatures onto tapes with a needle in her teeth. And he did it 3 nights a week, and then 5, and then every night there was. He never once said he liked it there. He learned the shop instead. He learned that the third board from the stove creaked, and he stopped standing on it. He learned to put the kettle on the ring at 10. He learned, without being told, that when she pushed the lamp 2 inches to the left, it meant she was about to say something difficult, and he would put down his pen and wait. Once, when a spine cracked, and she swore, he reached over and held the board square, with 2 enormous hands, one on each side, for 40 minutes, without speaking, while she sewed. And at 3 in the morning, twice a week, her telephone rang, and there was nobody on the line. She worked it out in the 4th week. She got out of bed, went down in her dressing gown, opened the shop door onto the black passage and let it swing shut so that the bell rang. Then she picked up the phone and said, "There, it is still here. Go to sleep." There was a silence on the line, and then Sebastian Vane said, "Thank you." And it came out of him like something being pulled. The trouble came in October, wearing a good coat. Adrian Frost was a manuscript dealer with a tan in autumn and an office in Bloomsbury, and he had wanted Sharp and Reeve for 6 years. And he arrived on a Tuesday with lunch and an offer for the freehold and the goodwill and the name, and he put his hand on the small of Eleanor's back to steer her toward her own counter. And he was still explaining what he would do with the front room when he became aware of the man standing in the doorway to the back. Sebastian did not say anything. He looked at the hand. Adrian Frost was out of the shop in under a minute. By the following morning, his bank had withdrawn his facility and his lease had been called in. And when Eleanor found out and came into the back room with her hands shaking, Sebastian was reading a shipping manifest. "He touched you in your own shop," he said without looking up. "He put a hand on my back." "Yes." "And you destroyed him." "Yes." He turned a page. "Do you want him restored? It can be done by Friday. Tell me you want it, and it is done." And Eleanor, standing in the doorway with a needle still in her hand, discovered that the honest answer was no, and that she was frightened of herself for the first time in her life. "Show me the books," she said instead. "You never sent the receipt. Show me my books or I will believe every single thing that woman told me in the library." He put the manifest down. He took her under the arches, past the vault with the long table, through a steel door, down 11 steps, and turned on the light. It was her shop, not a storeroom, not a lockup. Her shop, underground, in dry conditioned air. The cases built to the same heights and standing in the same order, the travel by the door, the natural history along the left, the maritime on the end wall. Every book she had sold him, shelved exactly where it had stood in Bellamy Passage, in her order, including the hacklet she had misfiled under Voyages in 1999 and never corrected. Nothing had been sold. Nothing had been opened. Nothing had a lot number on it. Eleanor walked down her own aisle, 60 feet under the river, with her hand over her mouth. "You did not buy my stock," she said. "No." "You copied my shop." "I have 1,200 crates of your grandfather's shop in this room," Sebastian said, "in the order you keep it, at the humidity you should have been keeping it at. And when this is finished, I intend to put all of it back on your walls with my own hands. That is what the money was. It was not a purchase. It was custody." And then Eleanor saw the small table at the end of the aisle, with one book on it alone, out of sequence, lying flat. A slim green cloth volume, Rossetti, rebacked badly years ago by somebody who had used the wrong thread. She picked it up and opened the front board, and there in the top corner of the end paper was her own pencil. Her own hand, her own price code, and beside it the date written the way she wrote dates from the 3rd week of November 3 years ago, the week Daniel died. "I sold you this," she whispered. "Yes." "I do not remember you." "No," Sebastian Vane said. "You were standing at that counter with your coat on over a black dress, and you had been to a funeral that morning, and you sold me a book for £9 and you could not see me. I've been in that shop once, Mrs. Reeve, for 4 minutes 3 years ago, and I have never opened this book." Eleanor went home in the car with her hands in her lap. She did not go upstairs. She went into the shop and switched on the single bulb at the back, and went past the theology and the damp patch, to the narrow bookcase behind the stove, with the strip of masking tape across it, and her own handwriting on the tape saying "Not for sale." And she knelt down on the boards in her coat. Daniel's shelf. 40 or 50 books out of a dead man's study, in a bread crate 3 years ago, shoved into the dark and never touched. It was the ninth one along. Full calf gilt on the boards gone dark at the joints. A private printing. A pedigree of the Vane family of Deptford and St. James, 1871. Eleanor sat back on her heels with it in her lap, and her hands were shaking so badly that she had to put it down on the floor to open it. The margins were full of pencil. Tiny, upright, patient pencil in groups of 3 numbers, thousands of them, running down the outer edge of every page of that useless family tree like ivy. And Eleanor knew the hand. She had been married to it for 11 years. She had bought its socks. She also knew the system because it was the game Daniel had played with her in their first year. Silly notes left in the flat, page and line and word, and there had only ever been one book that they had used for it, because it was the one he had given her on the morning of their wedding, and it was upstairs on her own bedside table, rebacked last month with her own hands. The green Rossetti. Eleanor went up the stairs 2 at a time. It took her until 4:20 in the morning at the kitchen table with a pencil and a school exercise book, and the first sentence she pulled out of the margins of that pedigree took her 90 minutes and 11 words. The first payment was received in the spring of the year Sebastian's father died. After that it came faster, because that is how ciphers go. Dates, amounts, wharves, the names of 11 Vane men, where they would be, and when in the winter 11 years ago, that the family still called the bad year, the name Basha over and over, the Deptford house, that had taken the river off the Vanes, and been paid in Vane blood to do it, and the name of the man in St. James who had sold every one of them, in soft gold-rimmed glasses, sitting in a blue room, telling her she looked thin. And in the end papers in the last block of numbers, written later than all the rest in a hand that was tired and pressing too hard the sentence that took Eleanor's life apart in 9 words. If they come for me, the key is my wife. She sat in her own kitchen as it got light and understood her marriage backward. A quiet man who married a bookseller's granddaughter in her grandfather's shop, who had loved the shop before he loved her, who had needed exactly one thing in the world, that no one would ever search a channel with a damp back wall and 11,000 items in it, and a woman in it who would not know what she was holding. 11 years of Sunday papers and hot water bottles, and his handwriting on the shopping list, built on top of a hiding place, and at the end of it, he had written her down as the Lock. And the road at Bow Creek had not been wet. The bell rang at 7. Sebastian came up the stairs and stopped in the kitchen doorway, and looked at the pedigree open on the table, and the exercise book beside it, and Eleanor watched him not be surprised. "How long have you known?" she said. 11 days. 11 days. She stood up so fast the chair went over. "You sat in my back room and held my binding square and let me tell you about him. You knew what my husband was, and you let me go on being his widow." "Yes." "Did you kill him?" Sebastian Vane did not move, and did not blink. "I sent 4 men to Bow Creek to bring your husband to me alive," he said, "because a dead informant is a book you cannot read. They arrived second. My uncle was already there. I have spent 3 years being angry about it, Eleanor, and not 1 hour of that anger was for you, and I am telling you the truth now because you will not survive a lie." "Get out of my shop," she said. He went. They burned Sharp and Reeve at 2:10 the following morning. Eleanor got Hilda out through the basement hatch with the old woman's hands over her own mouth, and stood in Bellamy Passage, in a dressing gown and bare feet, watching 90 years of her family go up behind laminated glass orange light, climbing the shelves like something feeding, and she was still standing there when a hand came over her face from behind, and Dessakel said gently into her ear, "There you are." They took her to a dead print works in Bow. 4 floors of broken windows and a flat black river outside, and they sat her on a chair between 2 Victorian presses, and Lionel Vane came and crouched in front of her, with his soft hands on his knees, and explained with real regret that she was going to read the pedigree out loud to him, and then she was going to go into the water, where her husband went, because there was no version of the world in which the only person alive who could read that book went on breathing. 60 feet under the river, Sebastian Vane put his coat on and told Callum Rook to open the Deptford line. "You cannot," Rook said. "Arbin Basha killed your father. You have spent 11 years taking his wharves back, 1 at a time. Then he will be very glad to hear from me." "Sebastian, the river, the 2 yards at Silvertown, the whole northern half. That is everything your father built." "It is everything my father built, Sebastian said and pulled his cuffs straight. She is not. He walked into the printworks alone at 4 in the morning, with the pedigree in one hand and the green Rossetti in the other, and he put them both down on the bed of the nearest press, and Lionel Vane began to laugh with relief. "You always were a sentimental boy," Lionel said. "Kill her afterward, or I will. Peter, the book." And Peter Ivy, the family's accountant for 19 years, the little man who had signed Sebastian's checks since he was a boy, came forward past his employer and shot him twice. Sebastian Vane went down on one knee, got back up, and crossed 11 feet of concrete with 2 rounds in him, to put himself between the chair and the guns. He got her off it. He got her under the bed of the second press with his body folded over hers in the dark, and his blood soaking through the front of her nightdress, and Eleanor lay under 7 tons of Victorian iron with her mouth against his ear, listening to him breathe like a man drowning in a chair. And above them, Lionel Vane's men shot the machine and shot the floor and shot the windows. Then the doors at the north end came in, and the Deptford house came through them, because Arbin Basha had been paid before dawn in wharves. It was Eleanor who ended it. She came out from under the press when the shooting turned away from her, and she picked up the pistol Peter Ivy had dropped when the first Basha man reached him, and she walked across that floor in bare feet through broken glass, and she found Lionel Vane on his knees behind a paper cutter, with his gold-rimmed glasses hanging off one ear, still talking, still explaining, still calling her, "my dear." "You killed my husband," Eleanor said. "Your husband," Lionel said, "was nothing." "I know," she said, and shot him. They did not let her into the hospital for 2 days, and when they did, he was gray and unconscious with a tube in his chest, and she sat beside him for 11 days and read to him out of a green cloth Rossetti badly rebacked with the wrong thread. In the spring, 1,200 crates came up Bellamy Passage. They came for 9 days, on trolleys, in the rain, and a man in a black overcoat, who could not yet lift his left arm above his shoulder, stood in a rebuilt shop with new floorboards and no damp, and put every case back in her order, including the hacklet in the wrong place, and would not let anybody else touch a single one of them. The narrow bookcase behind the stove he left empty. On the middle shelf he set one book unopened blank bound by Hilda Wren in green calf, and he put a pen beside it. "Write the first line," Sebastian Vane said. "Nobody in this city is ever going to read it but me." Eleanor Reeve wrote it standing up in her own hand in her grandfather's shop. Then she turned the sign on the door and the bell rang, and she kissed the most dangerous man in London in front of his own second-in-command. And Callum Rook found something extremely interesting to look at on the ceiling. At the mouth of the passage, a black car sat, with its engine running, and one Deptford man behind the wheel, watching the lit window, waiting to be told when the rest of the payment was coming. Sebastian saw it over her shoulder. He did not tell her.